Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. Today, we're going to talk about the culture war that's happening right now in America. And if you didn't notice yet, there's a war going on for the mind, the heart, and the soul of America. It's being waged from preschool all the way to the prison system. And our guest today is an expert in this war of ideas and beliefs. Her name is AMALA EKPUNOBI. She was raised in a far-left activist household and was once a student organizer for the left. But unanswered questions and a search for truth, which I love, led her to a complete ideological transformation. And she's now the host of PragerU's show, Unapologetic with AMALA, and she inspires millions of young people and older people like me every single day to discover the truth, defend their values, and lead better lives. AMALA, welcome to the show.
Oh, Jimmy, thank you so much for having me on. I can't wait to get into this discussion.
Let's go. There's so much to talk about, right? But I have to tell you, and I've said this to you before, I'm a fan of all your work, right? So
thank you.
Yeah, you're so clear in the way you communicate. You're so clear in the way you share your ideas and in the way you contrast where you were and where you are with respect to how you think about things. So, let's start there. Let's start there, right? Let's talk about your beginnings, kind of the way you were raised, the environment you were raised in, and your journey in that kind of left liberal mindset.
Sure. Yeah. So it all started really from birth. My mom, for those of you who don't know me, happens to be a left-leaning activist, and she works in fundraising for the political left. So she's super happy with what I do now. And
I'm sure she is. Oh, that's got to be fun at Thanksgiving. You get home for Thanksgiving and
We've definitely had some very interesting moments as I transitioned and sort of went through this journey, but I was raised with her influence, and she was a fantastic mother. I've never wanted for anything so long as she's around. And from a young age, though, I was just really tuned into her work, her being a single mother. When I had days off of school, I would sometimes go to the office with her and be really entangled with whatever campaign she was working on and talking with her coworkers about their different interests and social justice. So really from as young as about 8 years old, I was invested in politics, and although probably not consciously on my mother's part, made really cognizant of my race and my gender in America. And I remember as a young person just thinking, I'm Black, I'm a female, life is going to be harder for me in this country, whether or not I like it or not. And I grew up in a really rural conservative area, which was very white. And I just remember feeling like, this is not the right space for me. These people are trying to oppress me. All of these different ideas that have become pretty commonplace. And of course, that led me down the path of activism. So when I graduated high school, I started working at the same organization as my mother.
That's amazing. So wait a minute. So you're in this environment. You have this kind of a framework, right? So you're looking at life through this lens really of race, gender, oppressor, oppression, kind of that victim side. So that was from, you recognized as a young lady that, at least in your belief system, that you were going to have an uphill climb. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I try to think back about what my earliest political memory was, and I think it was the election in 2008. And my mom sat us all in front of the TV and said, this is a really important moment. We all need to watch this. And when Obama got elected president, she started bawling her eyes out. And at 8 years old, I was thinking, why is she crying? She supported this man. She talked about how much she loved him. And she said, this is the first Black president. I never thought such a racist country was capable of doing something like this. So even when we had wins for Black people, I was seeing Black people being successful in this country, it was always sort of tied with the idea that they were breaking a barrier of racism in order to be that successful. So that was truly the lens at which I looked at the world.
And that is happening even in a bigger way today, right? There's so many tentacles. But one of the things you just said was, that your mom said was, I can't believe in such a racist country like America, ... I mean, that statement, that is the mantra of much of the leftist narrative today. In fact, if there's a disparity of any outcome, it always has to be filtered through the lens of racism. Isn't that the way it's working today?
Yes, and to our own detriment, because we're looking at these disparities, and yes, they are objectively many racial disparities. When we look at finances, when we look at education, when we look at job performance, things like that. If we immediately attribute those things to racism, we've stopped our path to solving these problems. There are so many other reasons we could be having these outcomes, but instead we go, well, here's black, here's white, here's Hispanic, and it must all be due to racism. And we're really, really hindering ourselves.
Wow, that is so true. Like, and so you're young, and listen, I was certainly like every other kid. I was an impressionable young boy and young man growing up in my home. I would say that my home was more leaning conservative for sure. Although my dad was an educator, which is very interesting. 30 years ago, our educational system was substantially different than it is today. I think today we're talking about ideology and indoctrination rather than education a lot of the times. But I was a product of my environment for sure. But there comes a point in every person's life where you start to evaluate things and say, do I believe this? Do I share those same beliefs? Tell us about that transformation in your life.
Yeah, so that started for me when I started working for the political left, which honestly, for those who disagree with my current viewpoints, I say go and work for an organization that completely 100% is emblematic of what you believe and see where you land after doing that. Because I did that for about a year. And when you jump into the deep end of your ideology and you sort of let it surround you, you have to take all that stuff in, all the good and all the bad. And I started to recognize a lot of hypocrisy, particularly when it came to the subject matter of race. I can't tell you how many blatantly racist statements I heard working in that organization towards white people and how oppressive they were and how they had no place in our society. And when you're surrounded by that and trying to find the right way, trying to do the compassionate thing, you can't help but have questions. And those questions, when I brought them to the higher ups at the organization, I was just shoved out, basically.
Wow. Okay, so pretty courageous, right? You're probably 18 years old at this time, give or take 18, 19, and you're immersed in the ideology, and yet you had the courage to be able to step up and say, hey, wait, some of this doesn't make sense, and it certainly doesn't make me feel right or good. And how do they respond to that?
So I always tell this story when I'm talking to people about this whole transitional phase in my life. I went to the VP of the organization and said, I don't understand. We're saying we're the tolerant ones. We're saying we're not the racist ones, but I'm hearing a lot of it while I'm working here. And he basically looked at me and said, you just simply don't understand how oppressed you are. And it's not my job to teach you really about that oppression. And it's not my fault that you're not as angry as you should be, and sort of just brushed me off. I mean, little did he know that created a monster for him. So,
I like that.
And that was the experience.
I like that. You're obviously tough. Like you've got this built-in toughness, and I love that about you. It's almost like if somebody tells you you can't, you're going to prove that you can.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I was like, you're not going to answer my questions. I'm going to go find answers elsewhere.
Wow,
that's what I did.
Wow. Well, and I can tell you, as a white man, of course, you were shut down because you don't understand how oppressed you are. That's a very interesting comment. It's an interesting ideology. If I try and defend the fact that we're not systemically racist as a country, or that I'm not racist as a person, then I'm said to be fragile, or I'm said, I'm painted as a harder racist. Oh, the fact that you can't admit it proves that you're racist. And then you get in this circular argument that you can't defend.
I completely agree. I will tell you, they are very genius in the way that they pigeonhole people into their ideology and into their own little box. As much as they say they're anti-boxes and they want everybody to be who they want to be, it's not true. It's very much a conformist ideology. And they've managed to find small tricks to where anybody who is dissident to their opinion, they have some sort of remark for that invalidates what they're saying.
Amazing. Okay, so if you're biracial, right?
I am, yes.
Okay, so that gives you a unique perspective, right? I mean, that gives you a really unique perspective. And I would say it gives you, not to say it this way, but it gives you permission to talk about anything at any time. Because you...
Right, unfortunately, yes.
Right. So that's for better or for worse sometimes, probably, right? Why is it so hard for Black people to express conservative political ideas? Why is this such a hot button?
Mm, I I think there's a multitude of reasons, I think, but one of the main ones is that we've created a culture where the Black identity itself is so attached to
Mm,
a specific political party. And
mm,
I think that's been something that has been very strategic. We look back into the 1960s and 70s and we see politicians sort of looking at how Black people are getting more involved in politics and how can we keep them to one party and one party only. And we've sort of interwoven a political identity with the quote Black identity, whatever that means. But I realized this when I started expressing conservative opinions on the internet, because I was immediately told, you're getting your Black card taken away from you, you're a race traitor, you're an Uncle Tom, you're a house Negro. All of these crazy things were coming at me, which could only tell me that you think Blackness is just attached to this one political party.
mm.
And I think a lot of it is just a manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's for power and control, I'm imagining. And,
Yep.
and listen,
Yep.
politics is ugly and messy and gross, actually, a lot of times, I think. And that's why it's so
Agreed.
hard to break free from it. But I really admire people. I can't imagine referring to a race personally and thinking of them in homogenous ideological or beliefs. I just can't
Hmm.
even that I can't get my head around that. And yet that's exactly what those who divide us do. They put us in these boxes, like you said. And if you get outside of that box, boy, you get crushed, don't you?
Yes, you'd be absolutely right. And I get it. It's I think a natural thing that we do as
Mhm.
humans. We are very tribalistic. We do
Yeah.
recognize patterns very easily, and unfortunately race is the one thing that you can just see right by looking,
Right.
race and gender, of course.
Right.
And we've managed to just hone in on the simplicity of our own minds and think that just because I'm looking at somebody and I see these certain characteristics, I should be able to figure out everything else about their lives. And it's a
Yeah.
really unfortunate hole that we've found ourselves in.
Well, I love the fact that you have both perspectives. As someone who's biracial, I love that fact. I have nephews that are biracial, so they get to
Hmm.
see life through both of the lenses too. And I've always said, look, my identity isn't in a characteristic. My
Right.
identity isn't in a skin tone or eye color or gender, you name it. That's not actually who I am. Those are features of who I am, but that's not who I am. But yet we're teaching our kids today, aren't we? Especially in our schools. So let's talk a little bit about schools. We're
Sure.
teaching our kids, and I know you've said a lot about what's happening in our schools, and there's a lot of stuff happening there.
Hmm.
Aren't we teaching our kids to make their identity about either their race or their gender fluidity or a whole host of other characteristics and decisions? Isn't that what we're teaching our kids to do?
Yeah, there are certainly plenty of schools that are engaging in this sort of activity. I mean, the NEA, which is the second largest teachers union in the United States, has endorsed this sort of curriculum. So you can only imagine that it is being sort of force-fed to these young children who are entering school at, the age of 5 and hearing stuff like this. And it's, again, very unfortunate. You think about my story, which I tell to people purely for the sake of having them understand how harmful this ideology is to
Mm-hmm.
children. I learned all this from a really young age. It drove me right down the path of activism. What do you think is going to happen to the millions of young American children who are learning exactly that? And it's false. I mean, it hurts everybody. It hurts the white kid who is now feeling bad about just being born the way they're born. And it hurts the Black child who has now had these invisible barriers set in front of their success that really don't exist to the extent that they say they do.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, right? These invisible barriers. And these are really bad invisible barriers because they're
Yeah.
reinforced in the way they're thinking. And your
Mm-hmm.
whole life, the direction of your whole life is contingent upon the way you think and what you believe. So if these
Yes.
kids believe this narrative, if they believe that they are victims, that they're oppressed, that it's unlikely that they're going to have success unless something's changed from the outside in, they don't take ownership of their life, do they? Don't they operate kind of as victims at that point?
Yes, you do. And I can speak to this just personally. So
Yeah.
I grew up in a small, rural, conservative, mainly white area
Where is
in
this?
Central
What state?
Florida.
Well, Central Florida? Okay.
Central Florida. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
Central Florida, and very small town. Everybody knows everybody. And again, I grew up with these narratives. I grew up with the idea that I was just oppressed simply by being born who I was in this country.
Mm.
And even though I was very successful through school, I was an all A student. I graduated valedictorian from high school. I got a good job. I got good scholarships. You would have asked me, is the town that you live in racist? And is it systemically oppressing you? And I would have looked you dead in the face and said yes, even though I had no empirical evidence to make such a statement, no personal life experience of racism, especially not on a systemic level, to make that assertion. I would still tell you that. And it's because the emotions that are tied to these narratives are so strong. And victimhood is really beneficial. I know that's something that a lot of people don't want to say, but it's a beneficial thing to have.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much in what you just said, and your experience is going to become way more common. I mean, this is the indoctrination system in every school district. And it's funny, I was talking with some friends, they're always like, well, I live in a red area, or I live in a safe, or I live in an area that doesn't teach that. I'm like, you're wrong. I don't care if you live in a blue state or a red state. None of that matters, actually, because the curriculum and the standards, generally speaking, come from the NEA. They come from the American Teachers Federation. So the ideology and this narrative is locked into our system. Can you fight against it? Yes. But don't feel like you're safe because you're in a more conservative area. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I completely agree with that. And even looking outside of schools, I mean, look at the influence of social media on young people's lives. Look at the influence of Hollywood. Look at how corporations are treating and injecting this sort of critical race theory based education into what they're doing. It is quite literally everywhere. And I know a lot of people think they can escape it and just sort of exclude themselves from the experience of it. But by and large, you're not going to find a place that does not have these ideas present somewhere.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem now, of course, in our schools, which is where is kind of the foundation of the way kids think, and then they grow up, as you said, to be activists or contributing in a positive way to society. I would create that dichotomy. But part of it is that in this environment, right, they've got the curriculum. Parents now, in many ways, are seen as the enemy, right? In fact, we heard elected officials, we heard people running for office claim that parents are domestic terrorists just because they're showing up at board meetings to contest the materials, the age inappropriate materials that are being given to their kids. Why are the parents now seen as the enemy? And what can we do about it?
Well, one of the strongest ties you're ever going to have in your life is the tie that you have with your parents. And we know how easily influenced children are by their parents and by the values that are shared at home. So if I was going to try to shape the newest young minds of America and I was a leader who was trying to implement this, the first thing I would go after is the parental connection that children have. And we're seeing this a lot now as we're having conversations about gender identity in schools. I can't tell you how many young teachers I see on things like TikTok and Twitter saying, if your parents don't accept your gender identity or your new pronouns, I'll be your new mom, I'll be your new dad. And it's this idea that, the village raises the child. It's sort of this collectivist thinking that we now have in regard to this sort of ideology. And how you fight that is really, you just got to be diligent as a parent, and you got to look into these things, and you got to be close and accepting with your child, but let them know when danger's near, and hopefully equip them with the critical thinking skills to hear the things that they're hearing and go, you know what, that does not sound right.
Right. And, I think a lot of parents have woken up to that fact that, wow, this is a real battle going on for the mind and the heart and the soul of my kid. And I got to show up, and I can't let this ideology infect them. You brought up gender, and this is obviously one of those things within the context of this comprehensive sex education program. Our kids are being exposed to material that I wouldn't want an adult to be exposed to. I mean, it's gross a lot of times. I probably shouldn't say it that way, but it is. And it's dangerous. And our kids are being robbed of their innocence, and they're being confused about their gender. Why is that such a damaging thing to our kids at these young ages?
I don't even know where to begin with how damaging the idea of gender confusion and placing that on a child is. There's so many reasons. I mean, kids lack stability in their growth as it is. They're forming adults, they're learning about the world, and to inject something that is so harmful as confusing a child about their gender at such a young age as that is only going to make things even worse. And much like with the other parts of left-leaning ideology, it comes with this sort of fight. I know your life maybe lacks purpose right now, but join this group and you're going to be accepted. Maybe you're uncomfortable with yourself. That could be you being confused about your gender. And it sort of plays into things that are innate in children. They want to be
Yes.
accepted. They want to do the right thing. They want to do the progressive thing a lot of times.
Yes.
And when you tell them that it's gender confusion, oh my gosh, how harmful can it be? And they're lying about the outcomes, which is the cherry on top of everything that we're seeing right now. They're not talking about the suicide rates. They're not talking about the mental health issues. They're not talking about the irreversible damage that these medical treatments have on children.
Yes.
I don't know where to start, Jimmy.
I think I know. It makes me crazy because it's so damaging, right? I mean, I've gotten to the point where I've showed up at school board meetings over and over and over again, and I live in a part of Colorado. Actually, most of Colorado is this way now, very progressive. And by progressive, I mean wildly regressive and damaging to our young people. But we show up there and nothing seems to change. I'm at the point now where I think we need a nationwide walkout. I think that every parent and every kid that's concerned about this should pull out of these schools and get their attention and say, hey, well, now we've got 10 million kids that are not going to school. And because we're not happy with the ideology and the indoctrination, and we're not going to subject our kids to it. I don't know if that's the solution, but one of the aspects of this gender thing that really gets me, because I'm a girl dad, I've got three boys that are grown and out. My daughter is a sophomore at school at Liberty University. She was she was an athlete growing up, a lacrosse player. One of the things that bothers me most is this biological males competing against biological females. Tell me, you've been in that conversation. You've been in that fight. What is that all about?
Well, it's all about this idea of radical acceptance. Even if things, deviate from our reality or don't make any logical sense, you must radically accept what is happening to you. And unfortunately, it's a trick that so many people have fallen for in the name of compassion. And I must make that caveat. A lot of these people think they are doing this compassionately. They want everybody to feel accepted. They want everybody to be a part of the group that they want to be a part of. What they fail to recognize is silent victims when it comes to this sort of dogma. And the silent victims right now are these young female athletes and, in every industry alike. We're talking actresses, we're talking chefs, whatever women are doing. Biological males who identify as women are now going to be able to enter those spaces. And we forget the harm that we're doing. And we fail to acknowledge what is reality, that men have advantages when it comes to these things. And it is cheating. And there's no other way to frame it. It's cheating.
Yes. Yeah. We used to care about that, right? When the Eastern Bloc countries were doping for the Olympics and the women looked like men and everyone's like, wow, what just happened? And they were dominating all of the Olympic sports. We have rules against that. We have laws against that because that's an unlevel playing field. It's certainly unfair competition. Men are winning more women's events and awards now than ever before. And it makes me think about Title IX, the protections that were so hard fought and won, that women have enjoyed for now over 50 years, are all unraveling in this idea of compassion or inclusion. What do we do about that? And where are all the women? Where are the women to defend this?
This is the question, And you know what? I will say, a lot of radical feminists coming to the stage and saying this is absolutely not okay and this should not be happening. But what's going to need to happen is the athletes that are competing against a lot of these biological males are going to have to do the hard thing and stand up. But it is the hard thing. I mean, I can't imagine dedicating my entire life to one finish line and then a biological male comes through and runs through it and you're standing there silent because you stand up and nobody else does and you run the risk of losing your entire career. And that's the problem. I think there's a lack of courage and also a feeling of why should I have ever been placed in this position in the first place? And with leftism, I warn everybody, you are the victim for now. It used to be that women were the victims and they were the ones being championed by the political left because they had to fight off the patriarchy. Where are they now when biological males are taking all their accolades? They're nowhere to be found. And right now it's transgender individuals. And in 5 to 10 years from now, it'll be another group.
Yeah. And this is exactly the way it felt when fascism was advancing in World War II, right? All these groups were like, they were fine if another group was being oppressed because, well, thank God it's not us. But then it eventually becomes you. And that's the problem with leftism, is that eventually it's going to eat their own. And I was thinking in terms of the athletes, I remember there were a bunch of athletes at the University of Pennsylvania and other universities that did complain, and they were just like your boss silenced you or said, hey, you just don't understand how oppressed you are. The athletic directors, the coaches, the those that were in charge of the leagues they were participating in said, hey, you're not going to say anything else or you're going to be off the team. And that's what's happening.
Yep. I mean, the fights are never easy fights, right? If everything was solved the first time we spoke up about it, we wouldn't have jobs, and we certainly wouldn't be having this conversation right now, which is the hard part, is that I think a lot of these women are not ready to sign up for the fight for what it actually is. I mean, I watched Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? And one of the swimmers showed up, but of course covered her face, and they distorted the voice and all these different things to maintain a little bit of anonymity. And it's because we've created a culture that makes people fearful to say what they actually think, even if what they actually think is the truth. And I hope that they become courageous enough to go, you know what? I'm not gonna sign myself up for just speaking out once. I'm gonna keep speaking out until something happens. I'm gonna stand there and I'm gonna not dive into the pool until something happens. And once that happens, once they don't have a sporting event because the females won't participate, that's when change occurs.
I love that. You're talking about moral courage, right? Being certain about what's true and good and right, and being willing to stand up for it regardless of the consequences, regardless of the sacrifice that you may have to make, knowing that, it may not even be about you. It may be about those that follow you, right? I mean, I might be in a fight right now that I don't win, but sets the stage to bless those that are coming behind me. And there is going to be this need for sacrifice, don't you think?
100%. And like I said, these girls run the risk of losing the careers that they've worked for their entire lives. Now, you can be the person who goes, you know what, I'll just be quiet and I'm going to keep swimming. Or you can be the person who says, you know what, I'm going to stop. And I will fully understand both positions. I think we both, of course, have it a little easy telling people that they should, stop swimming and in protest when we're in the position that we're in. And I can't imagine being in that position. But I would hope if I was, I'd be the person to stand up and say something.
Well, and I think you would be. And I think you are. I think
so.
Yeah, right. You hope so. If you ever wondered how you would respond in the face of censorship and tyranny, you're going to get an idea of it right now. But you're bold. You're courageous. Have you been censored? Have you been?
Loads. I think I've been banned off of TikTok like 6 times now. I've been protested at universities. I've had tweets taken down, YouTube videos taken down, you name it.
It's crazy. And that's the risk, right? That's the danger. In fact, I've met with people that are afraid to lose everything, and I totally understand that. I remember, let's shift gears a little bit on this whole censorship thing and silencing and cancel culture. And let's talk about, during the COVID days, right? I mean, the COVID narrative came out. Anyone that dissented against that, any doctors, world-renowned doctors that came out with contradictory information or maybe a different opinion, or the idea that maybe we could have early treatment and not just be sitting ducks. That was the beginning of kind of this mass censorship, don't you think?
100%. And I think the COVID crisis was utilized in a very specific and genius manner to set the stage for what would be even more censorship on topics that were far ranging from COVID-19.
Yeah. And I remember even in those days, like I would tweet something or I'd post something on Instagram. And now, of course, we're being censored, shadow banned, you name it. Any contradictory opinion to the official narrative gets censored. But I remember those days of posting things and then receiving the warnings. And now you have the COVID warning on everything. Do you feel like that this is going to continue, or are people fed up with this censorship?
I think it's going to continue, at least as far as our mainstream platforms go, your Twitters, your YouTubes, your Instagrams, because they all have ties to lobbyists, to the government, to people who have very special interest in what you see and what you hear. But I will add that I think people are recognizing this, and they are sort of pulling the wool off their eyes and going, you know what, I'm searching for something that's alternative. That's why I think we're seeing alternative media outlets, podcasters grow into fame, and people want to find people who they trust. And they're finding now that they can't trust the news. They can't trust these major platforms.
It's one of the reasons why I love PragerU. It's one of the reasons why we love all of that programming, your podcast. I mean, everything, all of these things are cutting edge there, but you're building your own platform so that you can't be canceled like you used to be able to. All right, let's talk about woke America.
Right.
I saw you, I think you did a post on Chevy. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. They were, I believe,
you-
sending LGBTQ books to
Do you
people.
drive a Chevy?
I do, unfortunately.
Do you still drive a Chevy? I mean, come on, this is ridiculous.
I'm still in the throes of paying off the car is the issue.
I understand.
I wish I could
that.
have immediately gone to the dealership.
Exactly. In a similar way, I remember when Harry's went woke, and then Jerry's came out with the Daily Wire, and oh my gosh, immediately when he went to the flamethrower on the Harry's product, and he said, "Hey, buy Jerry's razors," I was like, done.
Right.
I'm like, throw out my Harry's stuff.
Signed
get
up.
the Jerry. Yeah, it's a little different with a car. But
yeah, it's a little different with the car. It's a little tougher.
Listen, you gotta put your money where your mouth is, AMALA. I mean, this is ridiculous,
As soon as I am able to do that, I absolutely will. And I do think it's a very important thing to do is just recognize where your money goes and whether or not those companies are supporting your values, because I don't think many people realize how much of a hand these corporations have in things that have nothing to do with the product they're selling you.
Yes. Okay, so on that vein, and you talked about when your ideology shifted. Let's talk about Starbucks. I mean, here we are. The left ideology is equity. It's lawlessness, I would say, in many ways. It's certainly not prosecuting small crimes and not prosecuting big crimes. And then in Seattle, Starbucks has closed a whole bunch of stores in some of these really big core leftist cities. What the heck is going on?
Well, you'll find with progressive cities, crime often follows, and crime wave follows, homelessness follows. And it's because of a lot of the policies that they are doing in the name of compassion, in the name of equity, in the name of diversity. And I've worked on several of these campaigns in Florida back when I was on the political left, where we're talking about decriminalizing certain crimes. In Los Angeles and in San Francisco, we've seen things like petty theft be decriminalized, shoplifting be decriminalized. On top of that, they start ushering in these zero bail policies in an effort to help people who are in the lower income range, which often happen to be people of color. We say, okay, you've been arrested for a crime. Let's put you out on zero bail. And now criminals are emboldened to just do whatever it is that they want to do, knowing that they will be back on the street the next day. So a lot of intellectuals, and Tom Sowell says this very eloquently, is, you don't focus on the intention of your intellect, focus on the results of what you've created, and the results speak for themselves.
I love that. It's like, what's the outcome? What are the results? And right. And so now you've got these companies that are leaving areas, that are leaving California by the droves. They're leaving areas like Seattle, like Portland, like these other cities, which have encountered so much crime and lawlessness. And what concerns me is I don't want them coming to my town. Hey, look, don't do the same thing to my town that you did to your town, because you're going to move on after it's all destroyed. And that seems to be the leftist ideology, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. And that's often what happens is they move and they bring it with them. And you just have to hope that this doesn't happen with these large corporations. And I think the really heartbreaking thing for me is where the Walgreens and the CVSs and the Starbucks are able to pick up and move. These small business owners, these mom and pop shops who have nowhere to go, who have had their stuff stolen that's uninsured, all these different characteristics and facets of the problem here. They can't go anywhere. They don't get to pick up and move. They are shut down and their livelihoods are lost due to progressive policy.
It's amazing. Well, I want to hold these companies accountable. And like you, I'm trying to put my money where my heart is, where my belief system is. And it is hard. It's becoming harder and harder. When you've got Whole Foods and Chevy and Disney and Starbucks and Target and all the rest, it's like, oh my gosh, my kids will even ask me, well, Dad, at some point, where are you going to shop? And I'm like, I don't know. But anytime I become aware of it, I'm going to try to put my resources in companies that support the values of freedom, independence, hard work, all of the things that we talk about.
Right. I think it's the best move that anybody will ever make. And once you start to truly look into these things, you'll realize how big the problem actually is. And it is overwhelming in a way, that question, where am I going to shop, might actually become a question. But at least you're aware of what's going on. At least you can acknowledge the problem.
Yes. And one of the things I've done, I would rely on Amazon for just about everything. It's like, oh, one click. One of my sons got the nickname, Quick Click. And I'm like, hey, whoa, John, you got to
Yeah.
stop Quick Click. And I finally started to say, hey, wait, if there's an alternative to buy what I want locally or with a store or organization that supports my values, I'm going to do that, even though it might be more expensive. And even though it might take a little bit more time to get it, I'm making that decision because I just don't
Right.
want my money to continue to support these companies.
Right. And it's a smart decision. And for the people who are incapable of doing that, I completely understand. But
Yes, I know.
there is something ahead, and it's a goal to work towards, if nothing else.
Okay, so let me ask you this. How big of a role does faith play in your journey? How important is the faith community in restoring these deepest held values in our culture?
So I think a lot of people will be shocked by this, but I'm not religious at all. But I found that so much of what makes our country great does sort of have its ties with
Yes.
religion, and I recognize that and understand that so many of our founding fathers were influenced by exactly that.
Yeah.
And in a way, I do think it is part of what we need in
Yeah.
order to recognize the problems that we're facing right now. However, I happen to be an a-religious conservative.
Right. And that kind of speaks to the timelessness of the values and the truth. Like, you're a truth seeker, and I love that about you,
Mhm.
right? You don't really care where the answer comes from. You just want to get to the truth. And I think that's where
Right.
genuine people of faith want the truth. And that's why I love that pursuit, right? Because in the end, we really want what's true and what's right and what's good, because those are the principles that are going to be timeless and that are going to preserve our culture and our country.
Right. You just want, for me, it's just, I just want what's best for human flourishing. And,
Yes.
the truth will lead you to whatever that is. So when you find
Yes.
it, don't let it go. I mean,
Yeah.
a big part of just coming to this realization was sort of seeing the man behind the curtain. And once you see the man behind the curtain, you cannot unsee it. I mean,
You
you can act like you don't, and you can be oblivious, but it's there.
It's still there. It's not going anywhere. And I feel the same
No.
way. It's one of the reasons why I love our founding documents that say that our rights come from God and not government, because then those
Hmm.
rights can't be taken away by government. Those are
Right.
inalienable rights. You've been created, and you said human flourishing. That's part of my faith, is that God created each one of us with purpose and value and with a job to do, so to speak, to make this place better than when we found it,
Hmm.
to make a really profound difference for other people. I love that about what you're pursuing. All right, final question. Hey, tell us a little
Okay.
bit about Unapologetic Live. Tell us what you're doing and where you are, because all of our listeners are going to want to follow you wherever you're going.
Sure. So Unapologetic Live is my podcast and my YouTube channel. So you can check that out on any social media platform just by typing that in or typing in my name, and you'll find me. And really what our goal is to talk about the things that everybody's talking about, but hopefully give it a reasonable, rational perspective. So everything from politics to pop culture, we're discussing on any given day, and really trying more so than anything to create a safe haven for young people who are free thinkers, and allow them and give them the tools and the avenue to express themselves without fear of getting canceled and all that other fun stuff that they have to deal with these days.
I love that. You're restoring civility. You're restoring conversation again. And I think it's a big tent idea that everyone's welcome here, but you're going to discuss
Yes.
ideas in pursuit of the truth. So thank you for that. If you were to tell our audience to do one or two things that you feel like would help them engage and make a difference, what would you tell them to do?
Ooh, I think the easiest thing that you can do is go find somebody who you disagree with and make an effort to understand why it is they believe what they believe and why it is you disagree with them. And I think that's step one. Step two is just make an effort every day to stand strong in your values in one way or another. And I think every day, if you practice that, it'll get stronger and stronger and stronger. And some of the fear surrounding a lot of these topics or being open about how you feel will dissipate.
It's amazing. Amala, thanks so much. This has been a wild 40 minutes. You've been a great guest. Super thankful for you. I'm glad we made it happen, and I wish you the
Oh,
absolute
yes.
best.
Thank you, Jimmy, so much. It's been fantastic. And the audience has no idea the turmoil we went through to get here.
Exactly. But it'll be worth it in the end. Thanks so much. You were there.